Hell. That word held more meaning than ever before in their lives. It became more real than any of them dare imagined. Derek could feel that from the shifting forms of his friends by his side. Their eyes held shadows. Even Amber, ever the unshaken, trembled. Ryan was the first to recover. Time travel, he said, is theoretically possible, but hell doesn't exist. There has to be some rational explanation. The man looked at him. His eyes seemed to hide some secret, yet he said nothing. It doesn't matter if hell exists or not, Derek said. What matters is, how do we escape this place with our lives? The man nodded. That's smart, kid, he said. Derek felt a warm flush of pride. But you'll need more than your intelligence to get out of this accursed land. If this land is evil and it causes so much death, why don't you just leave? Amber said. Of course, the question had been on Derek's mind as well. It seemed rude to ask, though, or maybe he just didn't want to know the answer. The man uttered a dry, maniacal laugh. It was a horrible sound that made Derek and the others flinch away, as if it might be contagious. Leave, he said. He shook his head. Some have. I don't think I can anymore. Why not? Kyle said. If nothing is forcing you to stay, then you should take your family and leave Greywood. The man put a hand to his mouth, and it sounded to Derek as if he stifled a sob. His eyes glistened, and he thought the man would start to cry. The moment passed, and the man composed himself. He straightened in his chair, and then nodded his head to the chest next to his chair. You will find blankets and pillows in there. You can sleep down here tonight, he said, getting up. Derek also got up, and he heard the others do the same. What happens in the morning? Derek said. You have to leave and go back where you came from, the man said. The longer you stay, the more difficult it will be. What do you mean? Ryan said. What becomes more difficult? You don't know yet, the man said, surprised. Know what? Amber said, annoyed. Get to the point. Derek elbowed her in the ribs. The hunting ground, the man said. It moves with the hunter. Long after the man had retired upstairs with his family, Derek was lying awake on the floor with blankets piled on and below him. The pillow was scratchy and lumpy, but that wasn't the reason he couldn't close his eyes. He thought of the man's words. It moves with the hunter. He had said. He wondered what that meant. Derek didn't need to call out to the others to ask if they were awake. None of them could stay still for very long. Before going to bed, the man had assured them that the cottage was safe. He told them there would be sounds in the night and odd things in the windows. He instructed them to ignore everything they saw and heard. Under no circumstances were they to venture outside when it was dark. Derek didn't need to hear what the consequences of opening the door to the dark might be. He had a pretty good imagination. Sure enough, as the light of the fire dimmed and the shadows grew long, the night began to come alive. It happened gradually, as if sensing that the people in the house were finally retreating to their beds and no longer tending to their pitiful firelight. Derek wondered how it was for humanity in their earliest days. They had nothing between them and the wild but the mouths of caves and the burning of fire. That and the face of the moon and the glittering of the stars. But what comfort did that give to their forebears? If the modern age is any indicator, Derek's guess was not enough. Man always desired more light, more knowledge. Wasn't there a story about that? Where did it come from? All he knew is that man was given light by a god. It was a gruesome tale. The god was punished, but man went on. Derek wondered if it had been worth it. After all, mankind was a brutal animal, or so his mother liked to say whenever the news was on. Derek found that he missed the comforts of the modern age every much. If he got scared, he had a TV in his room that would entertain him endlessly. He had all the books he could ever read. He had a light that came on practically on command. What he would give to be back there, safe in his bed. Yet the dark was his reality now. That, and the things that lurked in it. It began with small sounds, the strong flapping of wings, the hooting of owls. It was almost strange to hear the normal sounds again. Derek became horrified by how quickly he adapted to the silence in the woods. They heard animals move through the grass by the cottage. That was strange in itself. Animals don't usually wander this close to human habitations. If they do, they tend to be stealthier. They know to avoid predators and territory rivals, yet whatever was out there, they had no such reservations. The noises of the animals increased over time. The slow, pacing steps became dashing sprints. They passed so close to the windows that sometimes Derek could swear that he would see a shadow pass by. He wanted to look away, but his eyes stayed fixed on the glass. Grunts, growls, and snorts sounded in the air. It was like a whole herd was out there. It didn't sound friendly. There was the sound of hooves pawing the ground. Derek's heart pounded, thinking that the animals were digging. They were digging a tunnel under the house. They would come up right through the floor. Then they would feast. A stark howl made them all startled in their makeshift beds. Amber reached out her hand and Derek found it, grasping it tight. He listened to her breathing in short, shallow breaths. It took him a few moments to realize he was doing that too. Kai and Ryan looked at each other. The animals outside became wild. They brayed and snarled. They screamed, and Derek thought he heard laughter as well. A terrible thought came into his mind. They almost sound human, Derek thought. He gripped Amber's hand tighter. He didn't know if hell existed or not, but he thought that this might be something close. For surely, if this was a nightly occurrence, they would all go insane. The animals continued their chaotic din. It went on for Derek knows not how long. It did not stop until a tremor was felt through the floor. It was slight. Derek barely registered it, but the animals outside, they became silent. Derek's ears were left ringing. The thumping continued, growing stronger with every pulse. A terrible realization dawned on him. Something was coming. As he realized this, they all gasped in horror as red mist began to float into the air. Soon, it covered the glass, and the outside world became a crimson void. There was no movement, no sound, only the thumping of the floor beneath them, steadily growing stronger. "Guys!" Ryan started to say, but he was cut off. A long, creaking note pierced the air. It was like a million screaming rusty hinges. In the red mist, high above the ground, somewhere in the field, 2 lights, point of light shone. They moved slowly. As the thumping below them grew stronger, the lights came closer. Ryan and Kyle, who were closest to the window, skidded back. They shivered in the cold air, but they didn't go for their blankets. They were mesmerized by the glow of the lights. Derek was too, and Amber also. They were beautiful in a way. The lights came close to the house. Then they stopped moving. They all noticed that the rhythmic thumping ended as well. They stared up at the lights. The lights seemed to stare back. The creaking sound filled the air again, this time loud enough to make them all clap their hands to their ears. Derek expected it to end, but the creaking scream continued on. His head was ringing. Eventually, the pain in their heads became too much. The creaking went on. They all began to scream. Kyle and Amber fell to the floor. They buried their heads in the blankets. Derek was about to do the same. Anything to stop the sound from making his head feel like it was splitting open. He stopped when he heard a voice in his head. It was quiet, but somehow it cut through the noise with ease. "Come to me," the voice said. "Come, and it will stop." Derek looked up, and the lights were closer now, much closer. They almost touched the glass. That's when he thought he saw a shadow around the lights. It was an oval shape. A head, Derek thought. Those lights are its eyes, and that is its head. The voice came again. "Come to me," it said. "Come, and the pain will end." Derek turned away from the eyes. As he did so, the sound suddenly increased. It felt as if a hot white knife was being pushed through both of his eyes and in his ears. He screamed, scrunching his eyes shut. "Come to me," it said again. "What is given can be taken away." At that moment, Derek knew he would do anything to make the pain stop. He opened his eyes, just in time to see Ryan walk by him. He was no longer screaming. His hands had dropped to his sides. An empty look was in his eyes. "Ryan," Derek said, shouting his friend's name. Ryan ignored him. He went on past the fireplace, past the dining area, and came to stand in front of the door. "Come to me," the voice said. Derek thought it sounded a little more eager this time. "Come to me." Ryan's hand lifted towards the lock. Derek was on his feet. He stumbled as the pain and having his hands clamped to his ears made it hard to keep his equilibrium. "Ryan, no," he said. He made his way on unsteady feet towards his friend. Ryan didn't seem to hear him. Ryan's hand touched the iron of the bolt, and ever so slowly, he started to slide it away from the frame. As soon as he did so, the shrill of the creaking sound grew to an even higher crescendo. It brought Derek to his knees. The bolt clicked all the way over. Derek looked back at the window. The eyes gave an evil flash, and the thing moved. Derek saw its form for a mere moment. It was tall, lanky, with arms that almost dragged on the ground. It was skinny but tall, and it seemed to have the elongated shape of a man. The ground trembled underneath its steps. It had terrifying speed. There was no way anyone could outrun this thing. Then it was in front of the door. Derek got to one knee, then he struggled to one foot. "Ryan, stop," he said, mustering all his strength into his voice. Ryan remained entranced. He grasped the door handle. His eyes were blank, but Derek thought he saw the shadow of a smile on his friend's face. Then he opened the door. "No," Derek said. The creaking scream ceased all at once. The shock of the absolute silence that followed sent Derek sprawling to the ground in relief. His whole body ached. He could barely move. He could only watch, his voice suddenly useless. He tried to call out to Ryan, but nothing came out. The red mist swept into the house, gathering at Ryan's feet. His friend's smile grew. It was one of coming home, or of a sweet dream. He reached up his hands as if to hug his mother in reunion. That's when the hand reached out of the mist. Derek's eyes bulged at the sight of those long, pale fingers. They were so thin that you could see the bone underneath, and the veins running along the inner epidermis. The arm was the same. The muscles were emaciated, and the skin stretched tight to the point of extreme striation. The fingers slowly clasped around Ryan. He did not seem to mind. His smile never faltered. Then, without a sound, he was pulled into the mist. Derek tried to scream. He tried to call for help. His voice just wouldn't work. He lay there, helpless. Tears slipped down his cheeks. He blinked through his blurred vision, watching as the mist retreated back outside, receding away from the house. The thumping resumed. He blinked once, twice. Then, on the third blink, all at once, the night turned to day. The sun shone, and the world was bright and green again. He bolted up, turning back towards his friends. It was all a dream. Just a dream, he thought. Ryan was nowhere to be found. Their friend was gone.